This lecture is closely linked to the lecture on problem-based learning. To briefly recap, problem-based learning is an approach we can take in our classrooms that's designed around a comprehensive set of real-world problems, and those problems provide learners with opportunities to acquire new knowledge, new understandings and skills. In the previous lecture, I talked about problem-based learning as a strategy that we can use in the classroom to help students deepen their understanding of important concepts and principles. And that's at the core of this lecture. Those important concepts and principles, or what is now referred to as big ideas, that should underpin our teaching, including the teaching that we do through problem-based learning. I want to start this online lecture by briefly talking about the sorts of integrated learning you might be seeing in classrooms on your placements. These approaches will be fairly familiar, but I want to challenge your thinking about these approaches and offer you another way of thinking about how we can design meaningful and engaging curriculum for our students. Learning across the curriculum, as you've probably gathered, is a newish term that we've adopted, but you might be more familiar with the term integrated learning or integrated studies. Mm-hmm. You know, that part of the timetable in a primary classroom that's often done Monday afternoon and Wednesday afternoon in between specialists and not encroaching on the literacy and numeracy block. That's commonly how a form of integrated learning takes place. There's also some other common patterns that I see in schools and that others observe in primary schools. And I want you to think about the sorts of integrated learning you've experienced or seen on placement. How many of these have you seen, or how many of you have taught in this way? I remember only a few short years ago asking my stepchildren what they were learning about at school. Megan, who was then in grade 5, would say, "We're doing healthy eating," or "We're doing the Commonwealth Games," or "We're doing gold," or "We're doing endangered animals." These things that she was doing, not learning, were organising themes for a collection of mostly discrete activities that were loosely and only very loosely connected to the overarching theme. I'm guessing that nearly all of you will have been part of an integrated unit that might centre on one of these common themes. There's an image in your reading this week that illustrates how teachers commonly plan their units around such themes. On page 288, look at figure 11.2 that illustrates the collection of activities that loosely link to the topic or the theme of trees and Arbor Day. What was your reaction to Karen Malone's words when she wrote the following? What is the logic? While there is possibly some merit in some of the activities selected, and I think she's being a little bit kind when she says that, how and why certain activities are selected, the relationships that the activities have to one another is haphazard, as there are no philosophical concepts or big ideas that are driving the learning. So thematic units are frequently this ad hoc or haphazard collection of activities, many of them great activities, but with the students not necessarily understanding the purpose behind the activities or how the learning from the various activities connects. Some of you may have also experienced this type of integrated unit, where teachers design a matrix of activities based on Bloom's taxonomy down one side and Gardner's multiple intelligences along the other. The thinking behind this approach is that students get to choose the activity they want to do based on their preferences for a particular intelligence or another. However, after a while, teachers cotton on to the fact that many students would always choose, for example, the drawing activities, and would rarely venture up the Bloom's taxonomy to tasks that required more complex thinking skills. So teachers then attached points to each activity, with the more complex higher order tasks attracting more points, or they might stipulate that you needed to select from certain categories as a way to ensure that students didn't just stick with those easy activities that they liked to do. Once again, however, this type of approach is simply a collection of discrete activities that are only loosely connected to the overarching theme. So here's a question for you to think about. Why? What is the purpose of doing 5 different activities on the one topic? What's the underlying pedagogical or philosophical logic that Karen Malone refers to in your reading? Why do we study the Olympics, or the gold rush, or even endangered animals? What is the underlying core idea or big idea that makes these things important to study? What is that big idea that unifies these activities and that helps our students make sense of the world in which they live? Stephen Covey is one of those incredibly rich US personal and professional development gurus. He wrote that book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Some of you might have had the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Adolescents pushed at you during your high school years. Anyway, one of Stephen Covey's key habits is to begin with the end in mind. And I think that that's a really appropriate way of thinking about how we plan our curriculum and how we design our curriculum. So what does it mean to begin with the end in mind? Have a think about when you do a jigsaw puzzle. You look at the cover to find out what your goal is, what the finished puzzle is meant to look like. Without that, doing the jigsaw puzzle is nearly impossible because you don't know where you're heading. Effective curriculum planning uses the same principles. You start with the end point. What do you want the students to learn? What do you want them to understand at the end of the lesson or unit that they don't understand now? These are not concepts that should be new to you, but it's important to reinforce them. Like Karen Malone and like Grant Wiggins and Jay McTeague, who you'll hear more about in a moment, I believe that learning is most effective when the learner understands the clear purpose of their learning. Why am I learning this? How does what I'm learning relate to what I've already learned? How does this relate to my life now or my life in the future? It's only when you can answer these questions that you arrive at deep knowledge, deep and enduring understanding. And the emphasis here is on enduring, because we need to think about what learning really is. Is it simply something that you can memorize and regurgitate, or is learning what happens when you understand a concept to the extent that you can take that concept or that skill and apply it in a different context? That's real learning. Let me give you an illustration. 2 years ago, I was having a discussion with my school-age stepchildren about the food that they were choosing to eat. So I was being wicked stepmother. They were choosing mostly junk food, no fruit, no vegetables, all the things that a mother or stepmother is horrified by. I asked them about the healthy food pyramid or the healthy food chart, and they looked at me blankly. They had done healthy eating in their primary years. I remember them talking about it, but none of it had stuck. Oh yeah, we did that at school. Nah, can't remember. To me, it seemed as though the integrated studies for my stepchildren, or their learning across different curriculum areas, was mostly about busy work, filling up time with a collection of unconnected activities that filled the time but that didn't result in real learning, that is, learning that can be applied in different contexts. Learning should not be a question of just doing a topic or of remembering. It's a question of developing deep and enduring learning of really important concepts or big ideas that really matter. Planning for learning should be driven by these key concepts and big ideas. So what is a big idea? Read through these quotes, mostly from Grant Wiggins and Jay McTeague. The term was coined by Wiggins and McTeague in their 2005 book, Understanding by Design, and is at the core of their planning process. So a big idea is a unifying concept. It's something that helps us connect the dots between those separate things that we learn, helps us make sense of all those different things that we might learn. students, particularly young students, place a great deal of trust and faith in their teachers to teach them things about their world, important things that help them make sense of their world. But often we teach these things separately. And teachers often leave it up to the students to connect the dots, to make the connections between those separate things that we teach. But young people are not so good at connecting the dots. That's actually a really crucial role that teachers play. And how they plan their curriculum can help or hinder that process. Using big ideas as an organising concept can help students connect the dots, to connect the separate bits and pieces that they've been taught. But big ideas are something else. They're also things that make us sit up and take stock. Take stock of what we think we know and how what we already know connects to and possibly challenges our existing understanding. Big ideas raise questions and problems, and it's when those questions and problems are evident in our thinking, that's when we start to develop new understandings. And I hope you're now being able to connect the dots between what I'm saying here and what I was saying in the last lecture about problem-based learning, where those problems centered around a big, important idea help to create that uncertainty, challenge our way of thinking, help us realise that there are gaps in our understanding. And it's when that happens that we are really intrinsically motivated to learn, to fill in those gaps, to connect those dots. So that's the importance of big ideas. It's probably helpful to give you some examples of those big ideas to help cement your understanding about what we're talking about here. Big ideas, or those enduring understandings we want our students to develop and hang on to, really want them to hang on to those, are found everywhere. But a really good starting point is within the rationale and aims sections of our curriculum frameworks. So let's look at a few of the key big ideas that I have extracted from our new Victorian curriculum F to 10. And I'm going to start with civics and citizenship. Here are a couple of big ideas. The first big idea is about democracy. Democracy requires people to have rights and responsibilities. That's a pretty big idea. It's a really key and enduring understanding. In Australia, we can become quite complacent about democracy. We tend to take it for granted because it's how we've always known it. But if you've travelled to countries where there is no democracy, you will have observed the rights of people being compromised and being made subordinate to the wishes of those who are in power. Think of the Taliban-controlled areas of Afghanistan, where children, particularly girls, are not educated or informed about what's going on in their world, and how that removes their rights and removes their ability to have a say in how their world operates. Think of the people in North Korea who, I was listening to a podcast the other day, who are eating bark to stay alive, who are fearful of speaking out about their extreme poverty and their hunger, in fear of retribution from Kim Jong-un, who lives this lavish leader's lifestyle. The big idea here is that people have rights. All people have rights, particularly people in a democracy, but with those rights come certain responsibilities. This is a really important big idea. So how does this idea of rights and the importance of laws link to a primary school? Let's think back to our unit on the gold rush. One of the things that came out of the Victorian gold rush was the Eureka Stockade. It was a culmination of a long period of civil disobedience where miners on the goldfields objected to being taxed in the form of increasingly expensive mining licences. But they had no say in how they were being governed. They handed money over to pay for their mining licence, but couldn't vote to have their interests and their rights represented in the Victorian government. So the rebellion, as short-lived as it was, is argued to have resulted in the granting of the right to vote to all miners, rather than just to the landowners who controlled everything. So instead of just learning some facts about where gold was found or how to pan for gold, a big idea that could be pursued, a purpose for learning about the gold rush, a logic for the gold rush, could be that this was indeed the birth of democracy in Australia, where people were granted the right to have a say in how their country was governed. Here's another big idea, this time taken from the history curriculum. The idea is that the world today is the result of what has happened before, and that there are differences between life today and life in the past, but that similarities or continuities still exist. So what's the big idea really here? The big idea here is the idea of change. Again, let's explore the gold rush, but from the perspective of the big idea about change that is embedded in the history curriculum rationale. What significance does the gold rush have for our lives today? Well, one aspect is that it represented the beginning of immigration from all over the world, but particularly from China. So it represented a significant change in how Australia was developing as a nation, both culturally and economically. Here's another example, this time taken from science, and this is the big idea of interdependence, and that much of the world operates within systems, where elements of the system interact in ways that generate different effects. This idea can be applied in a number of contexts. We could discuss this big idea of interdependence in relation to, let's just to return to one of our earlier themes, endangered animals. So rather than simply encouraging our primary students to do activities that teach them a whole series of facts about endangered animals, the purpose, the big idea, the logic that underpins such a unit could be this idea about how actions by one group impact upon another group, that we live within a shared system and that what happens in one element of the system has an impact on another element of the system. So we could also think of this big idea as being cause and effect, but in this case it's about interdependence. While each curriculum area has its own big ideas, there are some big ideas that transcend discipline boundaries. Can you think of other big ideas that are worth teaching? For example, what could be a big idea that could underpin a unit of work on the Olympics? Something that could represent an enduring understanding. Reflect on this in your group reflection this week. Sustainability is a really big idea, and it's at the heart of this particular course and the problem-based learning scenario or investigation that you are being immersed in this particular course. As with all the big ideas I've provided as examples, it emerges from one particular area of the curriculum. But at various times, sustainability has been seen as an idea that crosses disciplines. In the previous curriculum and in the current Australian curriculum, sustainability is seen as a cross-curriculum priority. In the new Victorian curriculum, it has a strong home under the design and technology curriculum area, where students are considering how we can contribute to a sustainable future. But in my view and in my experience over the last few years, teaching around this area, many of you have a slightly inaccurate conception of what sustainability is. So let's spend a little bit of time exploring and unpacking what that might be. Sustainability was defined back in 1987 by the United Nations as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sustainability is a lot more than how it's treated in most primary schools. It's much more than simply reduce, reuse and recycle. It's also more than pollution. It's also more than having a kitchen garden and a chicken coop in the schoolyard. Whilst these activities are really desirable and engaging, and they do offer a vehicle for learning, primary schools' reliance on these minimal ways of addressing sustainability tend to oversimplify what sustainability really means. And to get back to the definition, it's meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising future generations. So it's leaving the world in as good, if not a better place, so that future generations can experience the same or similar sorts of benefits and lifestyle that we experience. Sustainability is a concept that asks us to examine whether we can continue to live the way we have for at least the last 100 years in an area of limitless abundance. We're now facing the concept of scarcity. How do we manage our limited resources while still maintaining the way of life that has developed, or minimising the impact on our current way of life and allowing future generations to enjoy the same? How can we ensure ongoing prosperity and harmony while conserving our environment? So that's embedded in this diagram, which is called the 3 spheres of sustainability. And sustainability happens at the intersection of these 3 spheres, of people, of prosperity, and of the planet. Very often in primary school, sustainability is really confined to environmental issues, and it is so much more than that. Sustainability becomes an ideal vehicle or a big idea for helping students to make sense of multiple aspects of their world. So as you make your way through the island investigation, keep these ideas about what sustainability really is in the back of your mind. How does this big idea influence the way you approach the various problems that will arise throughout the investigation? Does it cause you to reconsider your taken for granted knowledge and views and understandings? Are you being pushed up against the boundaries of things that you already knew or boundaries of things that you didn't know? Are you better able to connect those dots between previously discrete bits of knowledge and understanding? Does the big idea of sustainability help to unify what you are learning and give you an authentic purpose for engaging in our problem-based learning scenario? So, in summary, big ideas are those unifying concepts that help us make sense of the world and to help us connect the discrete pieces of knowledge we learn about. Big ideas therefore become the basis of your curriculum planning. Big ideas are found peppered throughout the rationale and aims of each curriculum area, but they can also transcend discipline boundaries or have application across different disciplines. One quick example: change could be considered a big idea in an historical sense, how our society has changed over time, and the gold rush example I showed you was an example of that. But change is also a scientific concept, a big idea in science. Some properties and phenomena appear to remain stable or constant over time, whereas others change. So change, as a big idea, can have application in different disciplines in different ways. To repeat, big ideas should be the starting point of your curriculum planning, not activities. Remember that earlier slide and begin with the end in mind. It's important to determine and dismantle the big ideas of the curriculum. What are the big ideas you want your students to be able to understand, know, and be able to do? Your learning intentions are developed from these big ideas. Then your second step is to work out how you'll know if your students have developed the understanding, knowledge or skills that you've articulated that relate to this particular big idea. Then, and only then, do you start to think about the activities that you will design. And these activities need to be aligned with the big ideas and the learning objectives. And the activities need to move the students towards being able to demonstrate mastery and understanding of those big ideas. In the next lecture, we're going to revisit learning intentions, and we'll also have a little look at questioning. I know that these are concepts that the majority of you have already done, but we're going to ask you to apply your existing understanding to these concepts in a different context. See how you go. Talk more next time.